All right, hey everyone, and welcome to Ocean Life and Currents. Really, this is going to be mostly about ocean life, and towards the end, we'll get a little bit into currents, which will take us further. So to help us out today, I've got my friend Bradley here. So, Bradley, why don't you say hi to everybody?
Hi, everybody.
Okay, and what you might not know is I have a bit of a special gift, and I promised Bradley something. A while ago, I told him I would turn him into his favorite sea creature, which means he can then go into the ocean, experience all this for himself. So I'm here today to do that. So Bradley, what's your favorite sea creature?
A mermaid.
Mermaid.
Yeah.
But those are make-believe, right?
Yeah, I still love mermaids.
Anything else? Any other sea creature maybe?
Nope, mermaids are my favorite.
Mermaids. Okay. Well, I've never done this for a make-believe creature before, but I guess we can give it a shot.
Okay.
All right. Well, let's stand up here, and you get ready. Are you ready?
Yeah.
Well, we'll try. All right. So here we go. Oh. Okay. That wasn't supposed to happen. Right. Hey everyone. Well, first things first, I promise you Bradley's just fine. Turns out that wears off after a couple hours, so don't worry about him at all. We'll go ahead and get started with our ocean life and currents. And before we do that, I just want to say, I want to talk about your assignment a little bit that you guys just did. I really appreciate your responses. I liked reading through those. Something I do want to say though is, I told you before that you can't get a wrong answer for those. There's open-ended questions. I'm going to throw those in there to just maybe give you something to think about and bring us into our next topic, or just see what's on your mind. However, if you put nothing or you put I don't know, that's not acceptable. All right? So the whole idea with this is to get you thinking, and I'm going to use our next topic to explain that a little bit more. So all those questions I asked you, we'll tackle them throughout the semester, but the one I want to talk about today is that question, what is science? And what do you think science is? So the reason I say we're going to use this to kind of explain what I mean is science isn't about getting the right answer. Regardless of what you think, okay, that's not what it is. And I don't want you guys on those type of questions, don't get me wrong, on a multiple choice question, you have to get it right. I don't want you to worry about getting it right. I don't want you to, I don't know, so don't put anything. Just put what's on your mind, right? No one's going to see it but me. And I'm not going to judge you. You don't know this stuff. That's why you're in the class. So put something down. So science, okay? So let's talk about that. What is that? Well, there's a lot of definitions out there, and they can get pretty complicated. See if I can do this one in one breath. The intellectual and practical activity encompassing the systematic study of the structure and behavior of the physical and natural world through observation and experiment. Whew, that's a lot, all right? Well, there's a lot out there. I like to think of it more simply, the systematic process of asking questions through observation and study. So what does that mean? It's asking questions, right? That doesn't sound very complicated. And that's really all science is. Science is a tool, okay? It's not this mysterious realm somewhere else where only the privileged can be, or whatever you might think it is. It's just a tool. It's a simple tool. And I actually hope by the end of this class you are completely underwhelmed with scientists and what they do. Basically anybody can do it as long as you know how to use the tool. And that's going to be really important. So again, I want you guys to ask questions. And this is really what you have in you already. So if you've ever spent any time with children, you know their favorite question is why? Why? You try and tell them something, why? Well, I want you guys to be like that, all right? Don't just take for granted what someone tells you, including me. Hey, I get stuff wrong all the time, all right? Ask why, and that's what we're gonna do. We're gonna start with something you may think you already know, and we're gonna say, well, why? All right, well, why do currents move, right? Why is the ocean blue, all right? And we're gonna go further and further, and we're really gonna tease apart all the scientific principles that make this happen. And luckily for us, oceanography is a great backdrop for this, okay? I told you before, oceanography is the study of everything, right? The whole planet, the whole universe, all of time. So we can use oceanography to really talk about whatever we want. Now, I have my favorite things, and that's what I'm gonna move towards. If you guys have something else you wanna know more about or talk about, let me know, and I'll try and incorporate it into something. But the important part is also we need to break it down. And there's several ways we can sort of break this down. So going forward with all these lectures, the next thing I want you to do is I've included the slides or some slides with these lecture videos. And the idea is that you guys go pull that up. So you pause this video and go grab that now and have those up next to you while you're watching this, because I'm not going to put every graphic in here. It would take me way too long. But you have those to study from. And oh, by the way, if I take the time to put something in a lecture slide or in the video, maybe it's a good thing to write into your notes, right? You might want to do it. So anyhow, so there's several ways to do this. So I showed you guys this figure before. And this is really cool because this is, I mean, not only is it a nice figure, which I didn't make, but it's the way we generally sort of get into oceanography. And this is the way we study it. So between biology, chemistry, physics, and geology, all right, we break that up, and oceanographers have their specialty. I'm a microbiologist. I study primary biology. But I couldn't do that without studying all of the other processes, right? So the thing I want to emphasize to you guys is it's not one subject, right? All of this stuff is connected. Everything's intertwined. So I want to do something a little bit differently. I want to study this in a different way. We're going to divide the ocean by environments, okay? We're going to take a certain section and we're going to look at all of the biology, chemistry, physics, and geology in that area, because we want to see how they're all connected. And then you can see on a global scale how all of this stuff is connected. And for each one of these environments, I'm going to try and start with something you might already be familiar with. And then we're going to go from there, and we're going to keep asking why. Well, what makes this happen? What makes that happen? Why do we care about the chemistry if we're talking about penguins, right? What is the big deal here? So let's go ahead and start by this figure here, and we're going to divide up the ocean. And there's two main ways to do this, and these are two words you guys need to know, and it's pelagic and benthic. So pelagic is everything open ocean, and benthic is everything on the bottom. All right, so those are the two main categories, and there's some individual ones in there. Again, there's more in your book you can read about. But importantly, this is how we're going to start. So we're going to start with each of these environments, and the main environments we're going to talk about are 4 of them, and I've broken up the semester into 4 modules based on this. The first one we're going to start with today is pelagic, or open ocean. Then we're going to get into all the benthic environments. So you're going to have a shallow intertidal zone, like I am here, right? And then we have a little bit deeper, but still pretty shallow, and that's on the continental shelf. And then we have the really deep ocean. So those are those are our 4 modules for the semester. All right, so the first one, right? I said the first one we're going to talk about is the pelagic zone, open ocean. Basically, everything out there, all right? Most of what you can't see standing on land. And we're starting with this because I want to start with some global processes, all right? Some big things that, again, some stuff you guys may already know about, and then hopefully you'll learn a little bit more about each one of those. The way we're going to do this is we're going to start with animals. Hopefully, if you're interested in oceanography, many of you have been to the aquarium of some sort and you've seen animals, or you have your favorite animal. I already know I've gotten some responses about things you guys want to know about, and it definitely includes these. Now, spoiler alert, we're actually not going to spend too much time on this. I'm really just going to touch on this. In fact, there's not really even anything in your book about it. There's just a couple terms I want you to know, and it'll help us going forward understand all of these interactions. So pelagic animals, open ocean animals. A couple broad categories, vertebrates and invertebrates. All right, so a vertebrate, you guys may already know, is an animal with a backbone, and that's most of what's out there. So your fishes and mammals and birds and reptiles are most of the things in the ocean, and those are vertebrates. So sometimes having an outside classroom doesn't always work out. And I'm going to tell you right now, it's starting to rain. And I'm not really sure how much further we're going to get on this, but we'll give it a shot. Anyhow, vertebrates, again, some of your fishes, well, all of your fishes and mammals and birds and reptiles are most of that out there. And you know, these may be some of your favorite animals, but again, this isn't marine biology. That's actually a separate thing. So if you have questions about any of these, please let me know. Now, as we move into what you would consider less complicated animals, we actually started to get into things that I prefer. And the next one we're going to talk about are invertebrates, okay? And these start to get really cool. And these are things like excuse me, are things like the squids and the nautilus and octopus and I'm losing my mind. And more, right? So these are all cephalopods. Cuttlefish, that's the word I was looking for, and I'll talk about him in just a minute. So anyhow, these are, except for the nautilus, these are actually pretty intelligent animals. And they do some really cool things. So you can see a picture of a squid here. All right, a picture of a squid here. And they have these cells on the outside of their body. So they can communicate or camouflage themselves in this way. They color change. They're called chromatophores. Going up even further is the... All right. I'm gonna have to fire my editor after this, but as the octopus, right? And these are actually really intelligent animals. In fact, I'm gonna pause this now. We're gonna move over to this really cool video of an octopus escaping a jar. We're gonna watch him do that. So let's watch that now and we'll come back and talk a little bit more about that. Now, honestly, my favorite part about that is he's not really trying to escape. He just didn't want the lid on. All right, so it's interesting to think about these animals as having personalities and desires and being comfortable, right? But again, they are really intelligent. And the last one I do want to talk about with the cephalopods, as I mentioned it before when I couldn't think of the name, is a cuttlefish. And so they also have these color change cells on them. One thing that's really cool about them is they can actually change different sides of their bodies independently. And because they use them for communication, what that means is there might be another cuttlefish over there and another one over there, and they can carry on two conversations at once. I don't know about you, but I can't carry on two conversations at once. So, maybe adjust your idea of what intelligence is. They're really adapted to their environment. Like I said, we can also discuss nautilus. They're less intelligent and less interesting, but they're really cool organisms. If you guys want to know more about those, dig a little deeper. Also fishes, right? Obviously pelagic animals, fishes, and there are a lot of them. There are over 30,000 plus species of fishes, and they are really important not only for a lot of this energy transfer that we're going to talk about, but also food. We talked about that in the intro, why the ocean is so important for food. Lastly are the marine mammals, okay? And this is your seals and walrus and whales and, believe it or not, polar bears, all right? So yes, they're bears, they live on land, but because they primarily hunt in the ocean and live around the ocean, they are considered marine mammals. Now, the last couple groups are the marine reptiles and birds. And you can see turtles and lizards and obviously birds. And only one thing I want to point out with them that's actually pretty cool is they really can't deal with the salt water very well. And they have a really cool mechanism to get rid of the salt. So if you've ever, I'll throw up a video here, if you've seen one of these lizards in the Galapagos sneezing on a rock, well, what they're actually doing is they have these special glands to expel the salt from their body, and that's what they're doing. All right, like I said, that's pretty much it with big animals in the ocean. If you guys have more questions, ask. I'll try and point you in the right direction. But really, the rest of the class is talking about all these processes. And we have so much to cover that we can't really do any more on these big animals. But one thing that they all have in common is there's something called Nekton. And Nekton means that all of these large animals have the ability to swim or fly or migrate of some sort against the ocean currents. Now, the other category that we want to talk about, maybe you've heard this before, is plankton. And plankton are the ones that can't, right? They are beholden to the currents. They are wanderers, and their root Greek word for plankton, planktos, actually means wanderer. And it's the same root word as planet. Ancient astronomers saw these stars wandering in the sky, and they called them planets. So plankton, planet, same thing, wanderer. And that's what they do. These are generally very small organisms, and they're divided in two main ways. Okay, you have phytoplankton and zooplankton. And phytoplankton are your photosynthetic, or not always photosynthetic, are your photosynthetic plankton, and they are responsible for making and storing energy. Okay, they take the sun's energy and they convert it into food. And then you have your zooplankton, which you can think of as sort of the animals in the ocean, the first small animals, and they have to consume food. So two terms I want you guys to know: autotrophs and heterotrophs. All right. So an autotroph is something that makes its own food, either from sunlight or chemical bonds or something else. It creates sugar, it stores it, and it uses that energy to live. A heterotroph, like us and most animals, or all animals, has to eat, right? They have to consume other things to get that energy. So you can think of the phytoplankton as the autotrophs of the ocean, and the zooplankton as the heterotrophs of the ocean. Now, I am going to touch a little bit on some of the different species of phytoplankton and zooplankton, but really the main thing here, which is going to come into play later on, is part of that energy transfer. They are the basis of the food energy, okay? So let's go ahead and get started with phytoplankton. And there's a few big ones, and I'm just going to touch on those, but there's a lot of others out there too. Two big categories are the algae and the photosynthetic bacteria. So your algae are a little bit bigger. They're not plants, and I'll explain that later on when we talk about some of the plants when we get closer to shore. But these are algae, and what that means is because they're not plants, every individual cell carries out all the processes that they need to do. So it carries out the photosynthesis, it extracts nutrients from the environment, it reproduces, right? They all do it in one little cell. Whereas plants are a little bit different, right? You guys can see they have roots and stems and flowers and whatnot. And then you have bacteria, okay? Sometimes there's a bit of a misnomer, sometimes these are called blue-green algae, but they're actually bacteria, they're photosynthetic bacteria. And the difference between these two is in their cell structure. So I'm not sure if you guys remember from like high school biology, but if you remember looking at a cell and it has a nucleus with the DNA and mitochondria running around, those are eukaryotes. And that's what that means. It has a nucleus. It has little organelles. And then we have something called a prokaryote, which is a bacteria, which just kind of has its DNA floating around. There's no other organelles in there. They're a little bit simpler from a metabolic standpoint. And the algae can be, again, we have some main species or main genus that we're going to talk about, and genre that we're going to talk about. And the first are diatoms. So we're going to talk about diatoms, dinoflagellates, and coccolithophores. And diatoms are really cool because they're beautiful. If you look at some of these photos in your slides, or a couple I'll put up here, they're actually made of silica, which is almost like glass. Right? You can see through them. They create these long chains, these complex structures. But also, they conduct about 20% of the photosynthesis on the planet. Now, phytoplankton in general conduct about 50% of the photosynthesis on the planet. So half the food and half the oxygen that we have come from these photosynthetic algae. And I'm not gonna lie, guys, it's starting to rain a little harder now, and I'm a little concerned with my video equipment. So I'll tell you what, we're gonna stop there with diatoms, and I'm gonna get packed up, and we're gonna take the rest of this inside. So you guys stay tuned, and I'll see you back here in a minute. Well, being able to lecture from anywhere also means if it's not nice outside, we can come inside. So I've just come into my office here where it's nice and dry. And while it's not as exciting as being by the ocean, there are some advantages to being here. The first thing I want to do is I actually want to backtrack a little bit, because I don't know about you, but I started getting a little distracted the harder it rained, and I kind of glossed over something kind of important. So we're going to go back and we're going to talk about these eukaryotes and prokaryotes, and then we'll move forward and continue with our phytoplankton. So like I said, there are some advantages to being in here, and the first one is that, right? I can show you stuff, I don't have to wait for it, it's all right here and I can point at it. So we did say, all right, phytoplankton, they're the autotrophic plankton, okay? And that means they make their own food, right, as opposed to the heterotrophs. And algae are the eukaryotes. Bacteria are the prokaryotes. So I told you if you remember from high school biology, but let's go ahead and talk about this a little bit. So a eukaryote, right, is that cell with, here's the nucleus on the inside with the DNA. Let's see, you've got some mitochondria here. In this case, you've got a chloroplast, right, because this is a plant cell. Algal cells look very similar. So that's our eukaryote, one with a nucleus. Just remember that. And then we have our prokaryote, which is our bacteria, right, our photosynthetic bacteria. And it looks a bit like this. It's a little simpler, right? It's just a capsule almost with DNA inside and some other stuff. And we'll talk a little bit about some of these other ones later on when we get into life and some genetics and whatnot. But I just wanted to make sure before we move forward that you guys understood. So we're primarily going to be talking about these eukaryotes, the photosynthetic algae. And we'll kind of gloss over the prokaryotes here a little bit. So anyhow, back to what we were discussing, and we were talking about diatoms, all right? So all of algae, we said we're going to talk about diatoms, dinoflagellates, and coccolithophores, and we're going to start with diatoms. And again, they're beautiful, right? So they make these frustules, okay, out of almost glass. You can sort of see some photos here. So this is an actual microscope picture, and I'll throw a few more in your lecture slides so you can see them. But they make these structures, and they make long skinny ones and round ones, and you can see here's a color shot of a lot of these things, and they're absolutely beautiful. They store energy as fatty acids. You can actually see inside these cells these little globules of fat, and that does a couple things. Number one, it stores their energy, but it also helps them float a little bit because oil floats on water, and they can stay closer to the sunlight in that way. A few things about diatoms. Like I already said, their cell walls are made of silica, glassy shell, but they're also responsible for about 20% of the oxygen produced on the planet. So all of these photosynthetic algae are about 50%, and diatoms make up about 20%. And that's a lot coming from these tiny microscopic organisms. Next, we'll move on to dinoflagellates, okay? And dino, just Greek for whirl, and that means they have, and flagellate has flagella. So they have these two flagella. One kind of goes around their structure here and one at the bottom. And the one that goes around their structure is what makes them whirl. So they get that name because they can actually spin as they're moving along. And then the one at the bottom propels them along. So they can actually move a little bit in the water. I said sometimes they can move, but just not very far, not against the ocean currents. Some interesting things about dinoflagellates. So many are photosynthetic, but most are actually a mix. They can do both. They're called mixotrophic. They can, if there's plenty of food around, they can use their flagella and they can swim around and they can go catch prey and they can eat it. Or if there's not enough, they can just hang out and use sunlight for photosynthesis to create their own energy, which is pretty outstanding. It'd be great if you forgot to pack a lunch and you could just walk outside and you'd be fine. A few other things with these, if you've ever seen, the beaches closed around here because of a harmful algal bloom, a red tide, that's what this is. You'll see this kind of mat of, in this case it's orange, but they can be different colors, and those are all microscopic diatoms. And when they cluster together like that, when they get so dense, they start to excrete this toxin, which is harmful to the fish and harmful to you if you eat it. Something else they do, some are bioluminescent. Which is pretty cool. If you've ever been to the beach and you've seen waves crashing like this and kind of light up, or if you've ever been scuba diving or snorkeling at night, you can kind of wave your hands around, and actually I guess it makes them a little angry, but they'll start to light up. And so that's a dinoflagellate if you ever see that in the ocean. Finally, we're going to talk about coccolithophores, okay? These get their name because they're covered in these things called coccoliths. And you can see a photo of that here. These little saucer-looking things are each individual coccoliths, and they surround this cell as a protective coating, and they're made of calcium carbonate. If you don't know, calcium carbonate is basically limestone or chalk, or antacid tablets, honestly. And these are actually a lot smaller than the other two, but the three of them combined make up most of the phytoplankton in the ocean. So this calcium carbonate, this does something pretty cool. So sometimes these phytoplankton can bloom. So this is a picture, if you're not familiar, this is the southern coast of England here, all right? And this is a satellite photo showing the reflective, or actually the fluorescence of all these all these coccolithophores in bloom. So certain times of the year, the light's just right, the nutrients are just right, and there's not yet enough things around to eat them. And they have these massive blooms of these individual cells. Well, what happens is once they die, they sink to the bottom. And because these blooms, there's so many of them, they don't all get eaten and they start to pile up. We'll get into that as we talk about sediments later on, but what happens is when that piles up, it compacts over time, right? And it creates rock. And then geologic processes come along and they push that land or that rock up. So this is actually the southern coast of England, right around here or so. I don't remember exactly where it is, but it's the White Cliffs of Dover. And this is from diatoms, and a few other things too, but microscopic creatures that pile up on the ocean floor over time and then get pushed up because of geology, right? So that's that calcium carbonate. Just to give you an idea of size here, in the middle is a diatom, and then it's surrounded by all these coccolithophores. So coccolithophores are a bit smaller. This is just a picture to give you some size feeling here. And finally, we have the cyanobacteria, so those prokaryotes. Remember I showed you that slide where they don't have a nucleus and they don't have organelles. And sometimes you'll see it as pond scum, right? And somebody might say, oh, look at all that algae. Well, in reality, that is bacteria, and that's the cyanobacteria. Personally, I am a microbiologist, and I think that when we get a little further, I'll briefly talk about some other types of processes that microbes can do, but they start to get really interesting, not just making or breathing oxygen. They get pretty fascinating on what they can do. But the important part here is that these are all energy producers, okay? They take sunlight, they use photosynthesis, and they store that energy into their body, in a case like we saw of the diatoms, in actual fat. So next on the scale are these zooplankton. These are the heterotrophic plankton. These are the ones that need to eat to survive. And you can see they come in all shapes and forms. They can be pretty cool looking. These are mostly under the microscope. Some really neat structures here. Some of them are see-through. They can be pretty fantastic. And what I want you to get out of this is there are two main categories of zooplankton: holoplankton and meroplankton. Okay, so holoplankton, you can see a picture of a bunch of them here. These are always plankton. They spend their whole lives as plankton. Again, drifting along wandering along with the currents. And there's some that we'll talk about. Copepods are a really important one. There's some krill in here. There you go. But there's some others as well. And they're, interesting. There's a jellyfish, right? They're always plankton. The second one is meroplankton, and they only spend part of their lives as plankton. So you can see here a barnacle, starfish, mollusk, even a fish. They start out as these weird little shapes, and then as they grow older, they either, stick to piers and boats or on the bottom, or they swim around, or they crawl around. So those are meroplankton, only part of their life spent as plankton. So the last thing really is, I'm just barely going to touch on this, are these microflagellates. All right, these are teeny tiny zooplankton. They almost look like phytoplankton, but they do have some of these structures here that allow them to hunt. And they hunt bacteria. They hunt the tiniest of tiniest things, and they do eat them. So just to show you a couple fairly important zooplankton, like I already said, copepods, right? These are tiny little crustaceans, and they are the dominant member of zooplankton. They are everywhere. And they are very tiny. Some of them you can see with the naked eye, and a lot of them you need to put under the microscope. But I will say, every once in a while, one surprises you. So I'm gonna show you a photo here. So this black structure here is a ghost pipefish. You can see the eye is right here. His mouth is down here. It's kind of a relationship to the seahorse. And the rest of his body is over there. And this guy's, maybe about this long, the total size of him. Well, I want you to focus in on this box right here, and I'm going to zoom in. And right there, right, is a little copepod. Now, to be honest, this was my photo. I took a photo of a ghost pipefish, and it wasn't until years later when I had this floating around on a screen, and I knew what a copepod was, that I noticed that I got photobombed. And so I'm not sure how many actual just camera photos there are of copepods, but there you go, there's one. All right, next we have krill. And you guys may have heard of these. They look like really tiny shrimp, Will and Bill krill. And these are incredibly important because they're a keystone species. This is one of the smallest crustaceans in the world, right? You can see here on a hand, you can fit a lot of them. They're teeny tiny crustaceans. I mean, you can still see them, but they're really small. And as it turns out, they feed the largest animal that has ever lived on the planet. So these get in such massive, massive schools. You can see them schooling or swarming in a way here. And they extend over, like as it says, several square miles, right? They actually can and I think I have it here, they collectively exceed the biomass of all humans on Earth. So there's more mass of krill than there are people, almost 8 billion of us now. And what this photo is showing you, let's see if I get over here. So this is an aerial view, and so these pink, just like we saw, are these schools of krill, right? These massive pink blobs. And then here is a blue whale, right? Again, the largest creature to ever live on the planet. And they eat almost exclusively krill. Here you see them here again. So that's pretty incredible. You know, we're going to talk about how energy transfers all the way from the smallest things through levels and levels and levels and levels up to the biggest. But sometimes it just makes a bypass and the biggest thing says, I don't have time for this. I'm just going to eat the smallest thing and be done with it. So there's that. Also on zooplankton, there are some that are bigger than microscopic, so a lot of jellyfish. Now, I didn't take this photo, but I will say that there's probably some camera trickery here. You know, they're probably a little bit closer to the jellyfish than they are to the scuba diver, but they can still get pretty big. I personally have seen jellyfish at least this big in the water, but they are still plankton because they can't swim against the current. They just drift along. So with that said, the important thing is here between phytoplankton, or the autotrophic plankton, and zooplankton, the heterotrophic plankton, they follow the current. And so now that's going to bring us into our next topic. We will touch a little bit back on the phytoplankton later on when we really talk about metabolism and primary production. But for now, the main thing is here to move us to currents, and that's what they do. So what is a current? Okay, you guys have probably heard of it. You knew we're going to talk about currents. You've heard of other currents. But we're going to make this as simple as possible and then move on. So ocean currents is a mass flow of water, all right? And really a current is a mass flow of anything. Electrical currents, air currents, okay? And in our case, water currents. But that's really important because we want to talk about mass. We want to know what mass is. And then as we go on later on, there are other processes that, while it may seem like they're moving water around, they're really not moving mass. So for now, just remember, ocean currents are a movement of mass. They're a mass flow. And we're going to talk about two very important kinds of currents. The first are thermohaline currents. And these are global phenomena. You can see here, this current path goes all around the entire planet and circles back again. It takes a long time. And that flows based on temperature differences or density differences. So you can see here the warm water turns into the cold water, the blue, and cycles around again. And they're, like I said, they're very slow. But they're also responsible for stabilizing our climate. They take the hot water and move it to the cold and move the cold water to the hot, and they just keep that balance going, sort of like a radiator in your room during the winter or an air conditioner in the summer. All right, so they move that heat around. The other ones are surface currents. Now these do the same thing. They also move heat around. In fact, one of the reasons why it's relatively mild up here in Northern Europe and not freezing cold, like if you look right across, you should be in Canada, is because of this Gulf Stream. So you guys may have heard of the Gulf Stream. Well, that takes this really warm tropical water and moves it over. All right, so they do some heat transfer, but they're more regional. They kind of stick to certain areas, not globally. And they, importantly, are driven by wind, and they're in that top portion of the water. They don't go any deeper. All right, and again, we'll say exactly what that is here coming up pretty soon. But that's the important part. You just really want to understand that we're moving into currents. We talked about life. Some life can swim against them, some can't, and now we're moving forward. So that's pretty much it for ocean life and currents. Like I told you guys, make sure if you have some animal that you're like, I really can't wait to take oceanography because I'm going to learn all about the pufferfish, right? Well, that's it. So make sure you ask if you have questions, and that final paper for extra credit is a great way to get into something of your favorite. I mean, that's what I'll ask you to do if you decide you want to do it is, hey, pick your favorite thing and learn more about it and then tell me about it. So with that, step back into my office here, and you guys go back, look through the lecture slides, look through the notes, do the reading, ask questions, come to office hours, and I'll see you next time.